Much for joining this Robert Wood Johnson Foundation webinar. Each and every day at the Foundation, we are truly humbled by the excellent and important and urgent work that you are carrying out. We're about 1 year into this pandemic, and the health inequities across the nation are undeniable. Your research and your programming are combating these inequities. We cannot be prouder. Built into each foundation grant are resources that will help you usher your work into real change. By publishing, speaking about your research or your program, you're helping to spread what works to so many others that can truly benefit. So that's why we're gathered here today. For many years, the foundation has worked with Spitfire to design communication strategies. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from Dennis Poplin, who is the Chief Learning Officer at Spitfire. And I really like that his bio stems back to middle school, where he first started community organizing. But I don't know if some of you have in the past participated in the Spitfire trainings at the Foundation 3-day boot camp, so to speak. But Spitfire helps nonprofits work smarter, not harder, when it comes to sharing knowledge or putting out a call to action. With that, let me introduce again Dennis Poplin. He's the Chief Learning Officer at Spitfire. Ever since in middle school, he has run public policy projects, campaigns, grassroots programs in many fields, including reproductive justice, LGBTQ rights, and media activism. And prior to Spitfire, Dennis ran field operations for Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Dennis has taken his years of field experience and translated it to an educational program at Spitfire. He facilitates trainings at universities, nonprofit organizations, and philanthropies. I know him best as the longtime facilitator with the Spitfire Communications Training Program, and some of you may have taken part in that training, as I mentioned earlier. For others, this first experience with strategic communications will be a real treat. At the end of the hour, you'll have both the tools and the mindset to create a communications plan that is both simple and effective. I do want you to use the Q&A tool that's on your screen to ask questions, and as well as the chat box. We will be taking questions for 30 minutes or so at the end of the program, but if at any point, if someone needs clarification on anything, just add your question there and we'll address it right away. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dennis.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here and to almost see you. I'm looking in the chat and seeing where everybody is from, and I'm seeing places from all over. I went to college in San Antonio, Texas. I see a couple of San Antonians there. I started at, my professional career there in San Antonio and worked there for many years. But I also see people from DC, which I just moved to the Hudson Valley from Washington, DC, where I lived there for over 20 years. And so New Yorkers, Texans, people in San Francisco, Portland, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you are. So here's what I'm going to do. So for the next 30, 35 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through the things you should be thinking about around strategic communications, and whether you are doing the communications yourself, or whether you are directing communications team, or whether you have a person or a consultant who is doing communications for you. These are all things that you need to know. These are whether you're directing it and you need to make sure that the plan is good, or whether you are doing it yourself and you need to figure out how are we going to communicate about this. These are the things to keep in mind. And we talk about this at the grantee training, but I'm going to give you a collapsed version that we can go through really fast, but there's more resources available. So these are the 4 things that we're going to cover, and then we're going to open it up for questions and conversation. Put all of those in the chat. They're going to be, we have our team behind there checking all that out, and I'll make sure I'll get to as many as we can. So the first thing is, why plan to communicate? So these are the big reasons. Very often what we do is that we start with tactics, right? We sort of jump into how we're going to get the word out without really thinking through planning and being strategic about um, what we're going to do. And so the idea is, why go through all this planning rigmarole in the first place? We're busy. There's a lots going on all the time. We just do what we have to do and then find a way to make it work. That's usually the way those of us in the nonprofit world think. But planning is going to direct and focus your work. It's going to give you clear steps to follow. It's going to let you know if you're going off course before it's too late to pull everything back and get back on course. And it's going to sort of eliminate the guesswork. Right? Your budgets are tight. Your time is very precious. So taking the time to plan now means a wiser and more strategic use of resources. So it's going to save you time and money down the road. And when you're creating a strategic communication plan, you often realize that you're doing a lot of the communication activities already. So then you can build in further ways to support the work. And you might even be able to cross off some of the things and create a what not to do list. So that's always good too. It's also going to help you take a step back and look at what you're doing and figure out where are there holes or gaps and where are the things that you're doing really well. And it's also going to allow you to figure out when an opportunity is coming, that you can jump on it and really take advantage of something that you might not be expecting. When to plan? Do it now. Don't wait. It's never too late. So if you've already started a program or a project or a campaign and you haven't really thought about the communication element of it, it's not too late. You can start doing that now. But what I encourage people to do is to bring in communication and start thinking about that at the very beginning. So if you have a person or a team that's doing communication, bring them into the planning process for your campaign or your program or your project. What we're about to follow, these are the questions they're going to ask. Very often what we see is that people don't call the communications people until the very end. And they say, okay, hey, we've got this thing rolling out next week, so we need a press release. And all the questions that we're going to go through, that's what the communication team is going to want to know. Like, okay, what's this about? Who are we trying to reach? What is the main point of this? All those kind of things. So bring them in as early as possible. Make sure that planning is on the agenda. So whether you're getting your staff meetings together, your board meetings, volunteer recruitment and orientation, make sure that how you want people to communicate and the updates around communication are always on that agenda. So how do we do that? Let's take a look. The first thing is to start with that strategy. And when we say strategy, what that means is, why are we doing this in the first place? So rather than start with those tactics and say, hey, let's put up billboards and let's have a press conference and let's all these things, stop, hold up, and start asking the question, why are we doing this? What are we doing? And what do we want to have happen? We look at three different things, but we have this tool that we created for nonprofit folks to create communication plans, and you're going to be able to download that and get all of that for free. But we really want to know, first, make sure you've got your goal figured out. Like, this is the big thing we want to achieve, whether that is making sure that every child in our area has a healthy lunch, or whether that is that we're trying to provide health care to a certain community. Any of those kind of things, that's what we're looking at. That's the big goal, but it's going to take us a while to get there. So the thing that the SmartChart, which is this tool, the reason it was created was about the objective. What are the the little pieces that we can break down into step by step that's going to get us to this major goal, right? So that's where we start. And when we think about the objective, we call it SMART. That's why it's the SMART chart. But the objectives are this acronym. We want it to be specific. And what that means is direct, detailed, meaningful. It should not be vague. Saying that I want to raise awareness, that's too vague. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. Why do you want to raise awareness? That's the question. Well, we want to raise awareness because we want more young people in our after school program. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So make sure it's specific. I should know what you're trying to do. It should be very clear. The next is measurable. That's quantifiable. So we can track the progress and know whether we actually did it or not. Sometimes this is a number. We want to recruit 500 volunteers, or it's we want to increase the number of people who are um, uh, increase the number of people who are applying to our program by a certain percentage, or any of those kind of things. And if it's about we want to change a policy, that's whether you know whether you change the policy or not. So specific and measurable. Attainable and realistic, these are internal measurements. You get to decide whether this is realistic for you or not. Attainable basically means is it something that you can actually accomplish? Ending world hunger within a year or 2 years, not doable. So you have to figure out, can we actually do this? Realistic means um, with the resources, the staffing, the time that you have, can you actually pull it off? And the last is time bound. This means that your objective needs a deadline to measure the success of your program or project. So we generally say anywhere between, say, 12, 24 months, no more than 2 years. The idea that it's 2 years is because things change so much that more than 2 years may not have any meaning. So from today, the decisions we make today and the decisions, the way we do this work over the next couple of months, that's really what we're thinking about. So the idea here is that we have something that's specific and measurable, something we can actually accomplish, and it's supposed to happen within a certain time frame that is no more than 2 years. Now, some of these things can be behavior change, and this can be things like we want people to stop doing something, eat, sort of put down the sugary beverages, or we want them to start doing something. We want them to drink healthy drinks, right? Or we want them to use condoms, or we want them to start exercising. All kinds of behavior change might be one of your objectives. Another might be policy change. And this could be at the state level, local level, corporate, any of those kind of things where you want either a government entity or a business to shift their policies to make them healthier, more sustainable, or friendlier to the people that you work with. And finally, we have fundraising. This is something everybody needs, everybody wants, but how you communicate to donors and potential donors is very important, and you can use this process for that. Okay, once you have this specific decision maker, this specific objective, it should be kind of easy to figure out who the decision maker is. The decision maker is the person that's going to decide whether you get what you want or not. So very often this might be a group of people because you're trying to talk to moms, or it might be a very specific person because you're trying to change a policy. So it might be the head of a company, but you're going to decide. Be very, very clear about who the decision maker is. So when I say moms, that's such a broad category. But what you might really want is we want Latina moms of elementary school age children in these 3 school districts. So I want you to be very focused and very specific about who you're trying to reach and what you want them to do. Okay, so who really has that power? I'm going to show you a video right now. And I want you to put in the chat after you see it, who is the decision maker for this particular communication? Are you ready? Here we go. Okay, Okay, so put in the chat, who is the decision maker here? Who are we trying to talk to? Who is going to decide whether this happens or not? Parents. That's correct. Parents. Um, Now, I see some people put principals or school superintendents in school, and they are they may decide, right, whether this actually happens or not. But this communication is directed toward asking the school to include uh, uh, all young people into sports programs. So yes, there is another decision maker who's going to decide, but for this particular communication, the first thing we want to have happen is to get parents involved and to parents to make the request of their schools. Great. Okay, does that make sense? So then, because sometimes what happens is this, sometimes we have the decision maker, and in this case, it's going to be the parents, but we would have another communication strategy that's just around the principal, the superintendent, the school district. And so the parents might be an influencer, but the decision maker for this next objective would be the schools. So we want to make sure that we're reaching the right people. And in this case, we're looking at a very interesting example too, because we're not trying to reach everyone. We're trying to reach very specific group of people. So in this one, Book People Unite, if you are a book person, you know who you are, because if you're a book person, like that's, you go to bookstores, you buy a lot of books, you have a lot of books in your house that you have not read yet. But this communication isn't for parents specifically. It isn't for grandparents. It's not even for everybody who knows how to read. It's for people who love books. And so they're really focusing in on that particular identity that people have. And in this case, when you're thinking about who are your decision makers and who are the target audiences are the ones who are going to influence the decision maker. Because if you have direct access to that decision maker, you can go to that person directly and talk to them one-on-one, but sometimes you need other people to help. So you're going to figure out how close are they to the decision maker? Can you reach them? Do they know you? Will they listen to you? And are they ready to do what you ask them to do? And if the answer to these three questions, or if it's no, then you might want to think of another target audience, but it needs to be someone who is going to be an influential person to the decision maker, that you can reach them easily, and that they're going to do what you want them to do. Another important thing to think about as you communicate to your target audiences and try to persuade them to do something is, where are they? Are they at the beginning of information? And so you're sharing knowledge, you're letting them know, care, and believe. Are you building will? Do they already know about your program, but they haven't taken that action? So you need to figure out what the barrier is, what's holding them up. And the last one is, if they've done what you want them to do, you want to reinforce the action. You want to thank them. Thank them for doing it. Give them an update of how the program is going, and then you can ask them to do something else. The most important thing about your target audiences is for you to understand what it is they care about. Now, this isn't what you care about, what you think they should care about, what you want them to care about. It's what really is the core concern for them. And sometimes we think it is big, important things like public health or all children being precious, right? And sometimes it's very small things. It's things like, we don't have time, or that sounds expensive. So 3 things that I want you to consider as you're thinking about how do we talk to audiences is, one is understand who they are, understand what motivates them, what they care about. Think about all the different kinds of things that might get in the way, and like, what are the possible barriers that they have? And most of all, to remember that it's not about you and what you care about, it's about them. So this is going to make your communication a lot easier. So in this example, put in the chat, what is the thing that this person cares most about? It says, go to college, we'll pay for it. California community colleges can help you afford college and build a better future. What does this person care about? What's their core concern? The cost. Maria, that's correct. Yeah, being in debt. That's right. It's not, we're not convincing this person to go to college and the importance of college. We're trying to address the concern about the cost of the tuition. So the next thing is, once you've got, you know, your audience, you know what you're trying to get them to do, you know what they care about. The next is, what is the conversation you want to have? And there are all kinds of conversations depending on your issue. In this one, I'm going to use a corporate example, but there are two different approaches to the same issue. And in this case, I'm saying that the issue is cars, right? So one, this first one, the Volvo, at least there's still one safe place to be. What is the conversation they want to have with through this communication? It's about safety, right? It's even there in, yeah, that's right, Leah. It's there in the in the headline itself. Now, this next one for the BMW, what is the conversation they want to have? This is about pleasure, high performance. That's right, fun, right? This is a fun. You can see it through Roadster. So hopefully your safe car is fun to drive, and hopefully your fun car is safe to drive. But we have two different audiences, two different concerns, things they care about, and two different conversations happening for each one of those audiences. They're not in conflict with each other, but one is addressing one concern and care, and the other one is doing another one. I'm going to show you another video, and then I want you to think about what is the example, what is the conversation they want to have.
It's my shot. I'm getting the vaccine so we can have Mardi Gras, y'all.
It's my shot. I'm getting a vaccine to protect my family.
I'm gonna get my shot so I can visit my 92-year-old mom and we can eat in our favorite restaurants.
I'm getting the vaccine to continue my culture so that I can dance another day. So I don't have to lose another brother. Sleeves up, Nola.
Sleeves up, Nola.
Sleeves up, Nola. Sleeves up, Nola.
Sleeve up, Nola.
Sleeves up, Nola.
Sleeve up, Nola.
So as you know, and you've probably seen, there are lots of communication going on right now about vaccines and getting vaccinated. But what is this particular communication? What's the approach, the conversation they want to have about vaccination? Andrea, that's great. That's right. Health is important. It's about community. It's about culture. It's about being together. Perfect. That is the conversation. Excellent. So now let's think about how do we create these talking points? How do you create the messages that you want to share with your target audiences? We have these 4 different message points. We call this the message box. The first one is where you are thinking about what they care about. You're making a comment, a statement that they can nod their head at, that shows that you are connecting, that you agree with them, that you have a shared value. The next one is overcoming the barrier. This is when people say, yes, I agree with you, but that sounds expensive, but we don't have time, but that will never work. So we don't want to repeat the barrier, but we want to address the barrier. And I'll show you an example of that. The ask, this is the one specific thing you want them to do. And very often what happens with nonprofit communication, we raise awareness, we get people to understand that there's a problem, but we don't tell them what they can do about it. So I want you in your, when you're talking to the people that you're trying to motivate to take some action, tell them what it is you want them to do. And it is not support our program. Tell them how they can support it. Do you want them to write a check? Do you want them to come to a Zoom meeting? Do you want them to write a letter? What is it you want them to do? Be very clear about it. Hopefully it is something that you can tell whether they did it or not, and it is something that they can actually do. So maybe don't aim too high, but make sure that it's a clear and concrete ask. And then when they do that, that is the vision. This is what happens to the world if they do what you want them to do. Now, the important thing about the vision is that the vision and the value need to mirror each other. So if you're talking about the importance of children's health in the value, you can't come around to the vision and say, and then also we'll all be able to go back to school, right? So if it's about children's health, it's got to be about children's health. So don't start talking about children's health and end up with the state budget, right? If you want to talk about the budget, that's the value that you're tapping into there. Let me show you an example. So the video you just saw about the Special Olympics, I broke that down into the message box, and here's where it is. So the value, your child deserves to play, right? Overcoming the barrier, yes, my child deserves to play, but my school doesn't allow that. In a unified champion school, students with and without disabilities play as a team, right? So there is a solution. There is something that we can do that is happening. So the ask is encourage your school to become a unified champion. And if you do that, your child can be included in sports. So your child deserves to play, your child can be included. You see how those two things mirror each other. One of the also the great things about that particular video too is that it shows the vision as well. As not only does it write the vision and you can see it, but it also shows children of all different types playing together. So they're not only telling you and showing you, but they're also allowing you to see it in real life. Does that make sense? We can talk more about messages in a minute. The things I want you, once you get these messages, there are some things that I want you to sort of avoid, right? One is MIGO, and this is my eyes glaze over. This is an acronym. Acronyms are bad because no one knows what they mean and you have to explain them. The other thing is, this is when we use language that is very complicated or jargony or very insider language, technical. So people don't really understand what we're talking about because we're using this language that maybe people who know a lot about our issue are going to be talking about and understand it, but regular people, not so much. And they're not going to ask you what you're talking about or what you mean. They're just going to tune you out. Sometimes we also give too much information, and that's when we think that we're never going to have another shot at talking to people. So everything we know about this issue, we're going to put it into this communication. Avoid that. So if they're at the beginning stages, you just want them to know about it, you want them to care about the issue, and you want them to believe that there's something that they can do, then put just that much information, very limited, just enough to get them interested and wanting to take that next step. Statistical overload is when things become a math problem and you have a lot of numbers, a lot of percentages, all those kind of things, right? And like math sometimes make our head hurt. So you want to be very careful about how many statistics and those kind of things you use. Sometimes that can be very powerful, but it can also be powerful if you think about it in terms of social math. And that means when you make an analogy. So this many people, that is the same amount of people that can fill a football stadium, right? So it's when you hear those kind of things, that's social math. And to think, how can you put numbers and statistics in context that has a relation to people's daily lives and they can really make that connection to them. And then the lack of narrative. This just means tell stories. Make sure that when you talk about your issue, you are telling stories about the people and the places and the things that are happening within it. Okay, now we've gotten to tactics. So after all that sort of strategic thinking, now we can actually go to how to deliver the messages to the people we need to reach. And those messages are important, and how we reach them is important. So this is where you're going to think very creatively about your website and your social media, your direct mailings, all those kind of things. Those are the tactics there. But within the tactics, I want you to think about a couple of things that can make your communication much more effective. And one is timing. This is when you're going to send out communication, when you're going to talk to people. Now, very often, you can't communicate all the time. People just start, it's too much, and we just tune it out. But so when are people actually thinking about the things that you're talking about? Sometimes if you're working in school programs, maybe it's right before school starts when people are thinking about going back to school. Or sometimes it's around a holiday. So there's guaranteed timing. And this means when, whether it's the um, state legislature is starting to meet, or whether it's around a holiday. So very often groups that work in food issues do a lot of communicating around the holidays because we're all thinking about, uh, it's a very food important time of year, but also it's a time when we're feeling generous and those kind of things. In this case, this is around Mother's Day, and this is an annual event where people are trying to raise money to uh, um, to provide bail and to get mothers out of jail, and so they can be at home. So that's guaranteed timing. When something is going to happen, you know it's going to happen. The next is invented timing. This is when you make up a day that celebrates your particular issue, that draws attention to it, whether that's Breast Cancer Awareness Month or any of those others, World AIDS Day. This is a day that Spitfire was involved in, which was National Crown Day, and it was really drawing attention to um, the laws that are being passed around the country that ban racially discriminatory hair policies. And that was one of the things that we have worked on. So you have guaranteed timing, invented timing, which you decide when that is. And the last is unexpected timing. This is when something happens, hits the news, you're not expecting it, but you are ready. So if there is something that happens in your issue that you know happens on a regular basis that you want to be prepared for, you don't want to have to wait to pull your thoughts together and your solutions and your recommendations, have them already ready to go so you can put them out there. And this isn't necessarily just about when bad things happen, it could be when good things happen as well. And people are thinking about your issue and that you can really help. Now, as you get this together, you've got all the tactics, but we want you to think about when is it going to happen? And so who is going to do it? And that's when you make assignments, right? And so you can figure out not only here's the tactic, here's who's going to do it. And if you see that the same person is being given a lot of jobs, maybe you can decide whether that's too much, you need more help, or sometimes you realize that maybe you've bitten off more than you can chew and you actually need to pull back and prioritize the different kinds of activities you're going to do. But make sure that those are assignments so people actually have their responsibilities. And the next, when you're thinking about your communication strategy, it's the budget. And not only how much is it going to cost, which is something we all think about, but how much staff time is it going to take? And that's often just as important as the money, because you might, doing a social media campaign may not cost you very much money, right? You have to design some memes, get some things together, but how much staff time is it going to take for people to actually create all of those posts? So that might be more time than you think. So when you have it, when is it going to happen? Who's going to do it? How much is it going to cost? And how much staff time is it going to take? Those are all very important considerations. And the final sort of two pieces here is to think about how can we tell if this is working? One way is to outputs and outcomes. Outputs are all the things that we're putting out into the world, right? This is the number of pieces of mail we send. This is the number of town hall meetings we have. This is the number of emails that we're going to send out. All of these are outputs. But the next thing I want you to think about is what is supposed to happen as a result of those outputs. Those are called outcomes. And every output should have an outcome. So if you're sending out 5,000 emails about this particular event, what do you expect to have happen as a result of those emails? I expect X number of people to show up. I expect 35 phone calls to come in asking for more information, right? So every output has an outcome. And if you can't figure out what's supposed to happen as a result of, say, our electronic newsletter, maybe you don't need to do that electronic newsletter anymore because you don't know why you're doing it. Or you decide that the newsletter is going to be about fundraising, and we're going to tailor the messaging, the images, the audience, all about fundraising. And so now we know that when we send out 2,000 of the newsletters, we expect this amount of money to come back in as a result of it. Does that make sense? So I want you to be thinking about all the activity you're doing, figure out why, what is supposed to happen as a result, and either you see it or you don't. And if you're not seeing the result you want, then here's what you can do. You can check, are we sending it at the right time? Are we sending it to the right people? Are we tapping into their concerns? Are we addressing their barriers? Do we have the right talking points? Are we tailoring it to the audience that we really want? Are we making sure that those moms of those elementary school age children in those 3 school districts, are we making sure that it really is created for them and with them in mind? Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, that is all the this communication strategy you might need. And so at the end of this, here's what we think about. We think about, okay, we've got this plan together. Is it doable? Are there things that we, are they consistent? Did we say that our audience cares about traffic, but we did never mention that in our messaging when we ask them to come to this event or whatever? Are we making assumptions about our target audience that may or may not be true? So we might need to make sure, we might need to do a little bit more research. And how are we pulling all of these activities together into all the other work that we're doing to make sure that it's all going smoothly? And then are we reviewing what's happening as we go along to make sure that we're making the progress that we want to make? So these are a couple of things that you can just check on your work. Okay, that was a lot, but I think we're ready. Are there any questions or comments or conversation that we want to have? Mia?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Great job. Thanks very much, Dennis. Very valuable information. One of the questions that came in is if there is an ideal number of times someone should ping their audience. Does it depend on circumstances? We don't want them to unsubscribe or to tune out, I guess. So what's the best number to ping without overdoing it?
Well, it's such a good question. And, you know, I think you probably already know this. If you're asking this question, you already know the number of emails that you're in your inbox from the same organization. And you have a feeling if that's too much or not. And generally, it's too much when you are not, when the communication doesn't address them, when it does not seem to be about them or for them, it is not in their interest. So really know your audience. And once you know what they care about and how to address their concerns, their barriers or whatever, and giving them very specific things that you want them to do, it is not going to be too much because you're feeding them. You're actually giving them information that they want. Another thing to think about is, are your audiences segmented? Have you kind of pulled them apart in a way that you're not communicating to everybody all the time, but if you've got a certain, say if you've got parents over here and parents are going to get a certain message, and over here you have young people or you have teachers, and so you have a way of communicating with different segments of your audience in different ways. So there isn't a magic number, is the short answer. But the answer is to always be thinking about, what does my audience care about? And how can I give them the information they need that they find useful, but also they find meaningful? But also it's meaningful to me, the organization as well. So just address that. And once you can always see when there's an uptick in unsubscribes or emails coming back to you that say, take me off this list and those kind of things, then you really do get a very immediate sense that we're not addressing their needs. And sometimes that's okay because maybe that group is the people who are unsubscribing, maybe they're not, they're not the best followers for your organization. But if you know your audience and tailor your messages to them, you're going to do okay.
Great. We got another quest. First, it was a great kudos for the presentation, very valuable and tangible guidance. This question is, with support from human impact partners, we've been working to advance a transformational health equity narrative in Wisconsin. Do you have experience with that framework, and how can we apply our strategic narrative to your messaging tools? Let me know if you want me to repeat that.
Yeah, repeat it. Because one thing is like, I'm not going to, well, I kind of am going to call you out because there's a lot of language there that I didn't understand, right?
Right.
So first of all, yeah, I kind of need it explained to me, but read it again.
Okay. With support from human impact partners, we've been working to advance a transformational health equity narrative in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Do you have experience with that framework, and how can we apply our strategic narrative to your messaging tools?
And for those of you who narrative is a real buzzword in the communication world these days. Narrative and framing. Those are two very important concepts that are getting a lot of attention right now. And framing is, when you think, just think about the word, it is how we see an issue. And it is really sort of the parameters, and the issue is inside of these sort of this box, and that's how we see it. But what we understand about framing, and very often framing is like, that's how we're supposed to see it, and we're not supposed to see anything outside of the frame. But the other thing is that we understand frame and what the frame is about an issue through narrative. And narrative is the stories we tell about an issue or a people or a place. And so the narrative, the stories support the frame. And sometimes the narrative is damaging. Sometimes the stories that we know and we tell, and sometimes we don't necessarily tell them, but we've heard them and they're in our heads. Sometimes they reinforce stereotypes. Sometimes they reinforce very harmful things about people. And so that the frame is harmful as well. So without knowing the specifics about your program and what you're trying to do, but I like the words transformative and all those kind of things, and using the use of stories is so important as well. I would just encourage you to really think about what are the narratives that we are promoting. What are the narratives that we're, and I'm just going to say stories. What are the stories we tell? What are the stories we point to? And are they, and really think about, are they unintentionally perhaps supporting stereotypes, supporting things that we don't find the most useful. Let me give you an example of that. Because very often I did a lot of work around after school programs for young people, particularly in young people in certain neighborhoods. And one of the things that we always heard, and I know you've heard this, is the great thing about after school programs is that it keeps kids out of trouble. And that when kids are alone and their parents are still at work, kids get into trouble, but the after school programs are there to make sure that they don't. But this is a harmful narrative, because what is it doing? It's talking about children. It's sort of criminalizing youth, right? It's saying that unless they're supervised, kids naturally get into trouble. So without meaning to, and unintentionally, the sort of the support that we were asking for these programs was not the best thing for helping people understand young people and what they need and how they can grow. And I'm not suggesting that that's what your program is doing, but really think about, all of us, think about the narratives that we are using in our programs, and are they the most positive, helpful, beneficial stories that we can tell? I hope
Great.
that was helpful.
Great.
What else? Anybody?
Yes, we have another question. How can we adapt this process, all the information you've shared, for policy research? For example, we want to share information with decision makers, but not advocate for specific action.
Yes. And we work, of course, with Robert Wood Johnson. We work with a lot of researchers, a lot of, whether they're academics or others, who are working on very important health, public health topics. And one of the things that you can do at the beginning of, and sometimes it's hard to think about when you're starting the research, but I would encourage you to think at the very beginning, which where do we want this research to go? Who do we want this to see this research? And what are possible? Because some research is going to have solutions, right? Or recommendations. Some will not. Some researchers just set out, here's what we found, and now do something with it. But I have this feeling, and after talking to many, many researchers, they want something to happen. Now, they may not say pass this law. They're not going to say, all those kind of things. But they could have recommendations that will make the situation better. But so at the beginning, when you're thinking about your research and as you're pulling it together, think about those things. And so some of the same questions we just heard in the last half hour apply to your research. Like, who's going to see this? And can they understand it? And what exactly do we want to say about the research? And even if you're going to do recommendations, what do actually we want people to do with this knowledge? And so I think that's a really helpful thing to think about, because you're not doing all this work for it to sit on a shelf. You actually want people to interact with it. So be thinking about that, and be thinking about, well, do I want policymakers to see this? And how can I, after I do the research, it becomes a question of packaging. How do I package the work that I have done in a way that is meaningful, understandable, accessible to the audiences that I want to see it? And if you want parents to see it, that might be really different than if you want a policymaker to see it. And it will change the way that you promote it as well.
Great.
Does that help?
Great. I'm really liking the next few questions. So the next one is, knowing that the communications team is not always included in every meeting, what do you recommend for giving guidelines to colleagues on how they can determine when is the best juncture to bring communications in early?
Yeah. So wait, what was the first part of that question?
Knowing that the communications team isn't always in every meeting, what do you recommend for giving guidelines to colleagues that could help them determine when to bring us communications folks in?
Yeah. So I would say that if you're having a kickoff meeting, definitely involve the communications team there, so they're aware of it. And you can also, they're aware of it. They know what you're trying to do. They know who you're trying to reach, and they're knowing what you want to have happen, because that's going to sort of get them thinking about it. If they can't be in every, and they don't necessarily need to be in every meeting, but you want to update them along the way, to let them know what's happening. I would also say that in this, I'm going to sort of broaden this out, because when you're creating a communication plan, there are some people who are sort of the center, the core of the work, who are going to make the decisions, who are going to put the plan together. But you may want sort of another circle of people that you want to share this with as you go along, that can give input. Sometimes that might be internal people, that might be people in other departments and other programs, but sometimes it might be external people, right? That you want a certain person in the community or people in the community to see it and give sort of, it's not that they're going to make decisions or they're going to sort of veto anything that you want to do. It's input. And so it's more information for you to understand whether this is working or not, whether it's making sense to people. And so there's sort of like the core group, the decision makers, and then it's input givers. And And then there are people that you want to inform and just let them know. And that could be people like the board and others. But all of these people have something to do, particularly the program people who you might be asking to actually implement this plan when it's done. So you want to involve them in some way, because there would be nothing worse than for you to have this beautiful plan all put together, and then the people who are supposed to do it say, you know what, that'll never work. Like, here are all the problems with it. So you want this kind of input along the way. And with communication people, they have specific questions. And you saw over this presentation, you saw the kind of questions that they're going to have. So be thinking about that. And even sort of structure your communication, even if it's an email or a fast Zoom call or whatever, you can tell them sort of, here's what we're trying to do. Here's the decision maker. Here are the target audiences. This is what we think the values and the barriers are. And sort of, we have some beginning messages, but we really need you to help us figure out our talking points. So any of that kind of information along the way is going to help. And they're not going to be coming in at the last minute trying to figure it all out. So at the very beginning, and then update them along the way. And when there are big sort of landmark meetings that people are going to be at, make sure that they're there.
Perfect. Next question. We have a new program at our organization, and we are struggling to reach our current audience. Our current audience knows and gets jazzed about the work we've always done, but we don't get a lot of traction when we're talking about our new issue area. How can we help our current audience care about our new issue area?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess I would, if I was in this situation, one of the things that I would try to figure out is, what's the reason for that? And I might pull together either is a small group, 3 to 5 people or less, and ask them, so we're trying to do this new thing. Here's where we are so far. What do you think? And I would try and just get some honest feedback or honest reaction, so you can have a sense of why this isn't hitting them, right? And is it because we're not talking about it in the right way? Is it because we're not connecting it to the current work? And so it seems like outside of our expertise, or is it just seem to it just doesn't seem to make sense to them? Or is it really because the organization is evolving, but we haven't brought our supporters along with us? Does that make sense? So, I mean, I think I would really just do a little bit more investigating, if you haven't already, to try and understand what exactly is the barrier. So if you know what your audience cares about, and this goes back to our talking points, here's what they care about, here's what they value, but here's our objection, or here's our barrier to this new program. How can we address that without reinforcing the negative feelings or sort of the uncertainty they might have? And it may just be uncertainty. So I think I would suggest just pulling some people together and really investigating and trying to understand what exactly is the objection. And is it something as simple as just the way we're talking about it, the way we're presenting it, or is it something deeper?
Great. I'm going to combine the next two questions and see if you can talk a little bit more about the SmartChart.
Okay.
So the first question is, the SmartChart reminds me of a logic model in research. Can we use it for those purposes? I've been on the website and it seems really well organized for an entire project management plan. And also, the follow-up question someone else had was, do smart charts change over time? I think this person must have participated in one of our strategic trainings because they asked, has anyone redone their smart charts?
I'm so glad you asked this question again, because the SmartChart actually, right now what we're working with is the third iteration of the SmartChart. And now we're just in the next month or so, it's going to be SmartChart 4.0. So we have reworked it in many ways to become more, to involve more cognitive science, how people make decisions. We've already always had that in there, but there's so much new science around how people brains work and how what persuasion involves, how people make decisions. So we included more of that. We've also included a lot more issues around equity and diversity and inclusion. So we're really, the Smart Chart has been in many ways sort of race neutral. And what we're doing now is bringing in a lot more examples and a lot more thought about how exactly we work in a diverse society and how we communicate in that way. So you're going to see those kind of changes as well. Plus, we're redoing the website, and so it'll be more user friendly and just be different like that. So that does change. And so the Smart Chart changes, and your plans will change as well. So as you create your plan and you put it into practice, when you're thinking about these evaluation or these benchmarks of success with outputs and outcomes, you're going to make changes based on the success or the lack of success that you see. The idea about logic models, people use the Smart Chart for lots of different things. We created a campaign planning guide called Planning to Win, which is also on the Spitfire website, and you can download that for free as well, specifically because so many people were using the Smart Chart to plan campaigns. And so it's a little different. So we created a tool just for that. And the Smart Chart is specifically around communication. But these questions are important questions for all kinds of work. So where these questions are useful and helpful for you, grab them, take them, and it'll help.
Great. Our organization has a really strong digital organizing team and has a strong supporter base that turns out to our actions and volunteers with us. We've got almost no individual donor base, though. How do we craft communications that encourage folks to donate without making it seem like we don't value the other ways they contribute? That might be a little specific.
One thing that comes up is, you've got this great donor, you've got this great volunteer base, right? And they're providing you with great work and services. But sometimes, people don't give because we don't ask. And that is an important thing. And as you look at the volunteers, and maybe it's a different group of people that are going to maybe there are two different groups. One are the action-oriented people who want to actually get in there and do something and make meaningful action, and the other group, there may be another group that feel more supportive with writing checks for whatever reason. But I think when we get in there and we think about who might be our donors, how do we talk to them and what do they care about? I think it really is this question of shifting some of the communication, the language, to a language of giving versus a language of action, even though I know giving is action, right? But I think I would look at your materials and see, where are you encouraging donors and where are you not? And once again, the most important thing that you can do is talk to your supporters and have this conversation with them. And it may not be the whole group, but pull some together and start asking these questions about, how could we do this? And how can we don't want to alienate people, but we also want to make sure that they understand that there is an opportunity to give financially as well as volunteer. And you don't have to do one or the other. You could do both, but we really want to understand maybe what is it that we're doing that maybe isn't encouraging financial contributions. So talk to folks and they'll help you figure it out.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. Any recommendations for deciding whether to build internal communications capacity within one's own organization versus other options like hiring an external communications consultant?
Yeah, well, the thing about, and I'm an external communication consultant, so take this with a grain of salt, right? But what I would say is, it really depends on what you're trying to do. and the resources that you have available. Because sometimes in organizations, a communication person also wears many other hats. And so is that enough, or do they need to do more? And so, and do you have the resources to have a full-time person? The thing with hiring consultants is really understand what you want them to do and what you're asking them to do and how to manage them. And sort of thinking through these questions of the SMART chart, that is really going to help you manage consultants, because you're going to be able to not only answer those questions, but tell them what exactly it is you want. And so many of the questions that we've been hearing are great questions for a communication consultant. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they understand your audiences as well. They may have other ideas, but you want to give them all the information that you have so they can make the right choices for you.
Great. So we're at the top of the hour. Dennis, thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us today. We will have this webinar and the resources on our toolbox, and we will be sending out an email to you guys so you have that link. We have a great line of webinars this year, so we really hope to see you again. Stay healthy. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.